The Detested, a story written by Obumneme Agudosi, narrated by Obumneme Agudosi. Synopsis. When Wambui lost both parents to a ravaging ailment, her life became laden with sheer pain and struggle. She found solace in the numbing and soothing effect of the local brew. In the euphoria and haze that ensued, she got pregnant for a man who sneaks into her hut in the cover of darkness. So Wambui was left alone once again with an unwanted pregnancy. When Maina was born, Wambui was far too prone to her alcoholic indulgence than committed to the well-being of her son. When he was 10, he ran away to Nairobi. Maina ended up on the dump sites in Kayole, where he lived in a shack and traversed most of the Eastlands for plastic and metal pickings, which he sold to be able to feed once a day when he was lucky. He soldiered on until a twist of fate allowed him to play football with a group of normal kids. He impressed the coaches and managers of the group and was later introduced to the convener and founder of the academy. He worked hard at the academy and was picked to join Das Gersten. Just like his dreams, it seemed the son of Wambui had cut a destiny far from abuse for himself. Endorsement by Joseph Moore, Chief Editor, Applied Knowledge Publishers. This is an incredible masterpiece that tells the story of resilience, hope, and dreams. The story recognizes the plight of the young people who are often victims of irresponsible decisions and actions of adults in the society. It will inspire those in the same situation to rise up and fight for their rightful place in the society through talent and hard work. Endorsement by Rufai Oseni, host on Arise TV Nigeria, analyst on African issues for the British Broadcasting Corporation, BBC, a global speaker and leader of thought. The Detested is a tale that reflects life in all ramifications. It teaches the tale of possibilities in the midst of the impossible. Endorsement by Dr. Chris O. Ifediora, Associate Professor, Griffith University School of Medicine, Gold Coast, Australia, and President, OCI Foundation International. This narrative deserves high praise for its tension-packed plot and the exciting, unexpected twists in events. It is quite impressive how the sentences are put together and how the plot lines captivatingly capture the author's point of view. Sadly, abuse victims typically do not have too many opportunities to save themselves. They also lack the privilege to experience life in ways other than those prepared for them by the same cruel world that crafted their original travails. Abuse generally stretches the boundaries of wickedness and engenders crippling helplessness and a dizzying sense of powerlessness. The fact that Maina was able to carve out a future for himself away from the abuse he had experienced his whole childhood should serve as motivation for anyone experiencing abuse, neglect, and disadvantages of any kind. The eventual outcome of Maina's life demonstrates that there is always light at the end of every dark tunnel for anyone who perseveres through difficult situations and remains committed to his or her goals. This storyline is excellent. It should be published in its entirety. Congratulations to the author for such a fantastic and relatable depiction of one of the negative societal issues facing our societies. The ending is both uplifting and motivating, and I strongly urge everyone who has ever experienced abuse or is now experiencing abuse to read this. Dedication to the memory of my father, Cyprian Onyekwelo Agudosi, to his reincarnate our son, Senachi Onyekwelo, that he and others to come will not lack and that they may know compassion. Chapter 1. Slowly and noisily, the tipper truck reversed into the dump site. With each simultaneous release of the clutch and pressing down of the throttle, a cloud of black carbon monoxide-laden exhalation from the exhaust pipe amplifies the polluted nature of the vicinity and reveals the age of the vehicle. The driver, plump and coarse-voiced, relying on his side mirrors and conductor, positioned the scrappy vehicle in its usual position. The sight was a vast mountain of nonsense, rubbish and sickness, but the buzz of activity and human presence around it pointed to its lucrative side. The coarse-voiced driver bounced off his seat and slammed the door in one swift move. He took a brief look around, then strode into the dukkha opposite the site for a stimulating dose of mirror. But before that, he needed to stimulate the army of scavengers, give them a dose of his coarse-voiced prompt. Wewe, watu mnafanya nini? Twende kazi haraka, he exploded. Before any lorry pulled in, the army knew who and who would be working on it. They operated in groups and would have about 10 groups available for work on a given day. Usually, there was little room for bickering or fighting. Such a level of organization, hierarchy, and efficiency existed, which was in sharp contrast to the field. Battles and scores were waged and settled away from the site. One could not jeopardize the livelihood of the entire army. Responding to the coarse voice prompt, the group whose turn it was to earn a livelihood went to work. They had to fill the lorry with plastic refuse. It was the youngest group's turn, the group that gathered the least plastics and subsequently earned the least in the past week. They had been distracted by the lack of leadership and argued more than they worked. But they had come over it. Now Maina called the shot. They had unanimously seen potential in a fellow who never chewed mirror or sniffed glue, so they voted on his sobriety. As the rest got set to load their finds, Maina followed the driver to the dukkha to negotiate terms. By the time he was back, his mates had already commenced work. They formed a human chain from their hip to the rear of the lorry. Plastics were stuffed in filthy, supersized sacks and handed down the chain until they got emptied into the truck in an ant-like fashion. Maina was only 12 years old. Only 2 boys were older than him in the group. The rest were younger, with the youngest boy being 8. But no matter a boy's age, he was required to prove himself worthy and be able to march along. Often very confused, dazed by the brutality of nature and humanity. But the only way was to struggle because he had to put food in the stomach. That was the amount of responsibility and discipline that came with earning meager shillings and ultimately surviving on the streets. On a good day, the group would earn about 200 shillings for every lorry filled. At the end of a good day, they would fill 2 lorries. Each boy went home with an average of about 40 shillings. Work started at the first sight of light. Everyone was expected to employ a great deal of teamwork in sifting and tearing through the layers of refuse. Depending on their preference and expertise, a team would settle for plastics, scrap metals, polythene, bottles, etc. They will continue till midday, storing everything scavenged in a protected heap on the site, waiting for the trucks to come and provide some assistance and encouragement for their labor. Maina towered above his mates in height and weight, but he was just a child, another of the countless others, males and females, who lived out there. He derived confidence in his height, although almost all the time nobody noticed or cared, and it fetched him no direct favors from his immediate surroundings and the world generally. He had no human friends, mainly because the world he knew did not support that type of emotion. Life was generally too fast, furious, and laden with uncertainties. But one thing was certain. This day, it started well for Maina and his group. Soon, the lorry would be filled, and the driver would hand them a 200 shillings note on behalf of his group. They would then wait for another truck to pick up the second heap. The proceeds would be shared, and everybody would set out collecting more plastics for the next day. Chapter 2. The sun has started to creep into the sky. Soon the entire Sagana skyline will be lighted, first by the yellow glow that didn't provide much light, but enough to get the first arrangements of the day's farm work in progress, and later brilliant light that would prompt the actual commencement of work. Being a predominantly farming community, the routine was pretty much the same throughout the planting season. But with the government's growing interest and support in innovations, the term planting season was fast becoming obsolete, as farm work had become continuous throughout the year. Wambui started her daily routine much in the same way as every other household in the community. First, she swept her small compound with a fagio and dumped the debris in a small compost behind her hut, an endeavor that fetches her income and favor. She then proceeded to wash her hands, face and mouth, mainly because of the next task on the lineup. Separated by a wall of climbing plants and a world of fortunes were her neighbors, very successful and affluent owners of large fields and animal flocks. "Hodi," she called as soon as she opened the gate, more out of fear for the dog than respect for the gatekeeper of the compound. And in response, she got a few barks of acknowledgement from the guard and none from the humans. She made straight for the cowshed. She proceeded to milk them. She went to calm them down, both hands squeezing in a rhythmic style. In a short while, she had 5 small sufurias from 4 animals. She took a quarter of a sufuria for herself as reward for her labor. The owners used the much they could, and the rest was sold. Back in her hut, Wambui commenced lighting the jiko. She needed a refreshing cup of chai to jar her properly into the day, warm her blood, and exorcise her from the shivery cold that possessed her. When she was done, it was bright enough outside and time to extract her djembe. That day, she had been selected, alongside other meticulous hands, to commence weeding in a quarter-acre Sukumawiki field. She left her compound and strolled down to the field, greeting everybody older than her while acknowledging any from her juniors. "Abara ya asubuhi," she called out to a group of 5 on the field as she passed by. "Mzuri sana, na yako?" came the response. "Salama salama," she returned, more to herself, not as loud as the first greeting, as if not intended for the group's hearing. She continued her stroll. The period between now and noon was the most productive, as the sun will bring its scorch at noon, and only the strong and determined could continue working. "Wambui, umelala aje?" came the greetings. She looked up an avocado tree to see Mburu, an obese and obsessed admirer of hers, clinging to a branch while plucking fruits of the tree. "Salama Mburu, na wewe?" she replied, slowing down her pace. "Salama," Mburu replied. "Haya, shika," he continued, tossing a ripe fruit at her. Wambui let it fall in a heap of foliage, which broke its fall effectively. "Asante sana Mburu," she thanked as she halted to pick the fruit. "Haya, karibu mrembo. Tutaona baadaye. Sawa sawa," he continued. She recognized the stressed sawa sawa and understood the latent implication. "Sawa Mburu," she answered. But now she has to move on. Mburu was not very successful at climbing. Stories of his epic falls were not news to anybody around, and the fact that he could get himself up trees was a daily miracle. Wambui strolled on, thinking to herself that it wouldn't be a good idea to witness his fall, especially then. She arrived at the field to find 2 fellow workers already there. The field owner would arrive soon, terms would be negotiated as fast as possible, and work would commence without further formalities. Wambui had an enjoyable childhood until the age of 12. Her parents were childhood lovers, both born and bred in Muranga. Life had no reason to dish her such a cruel fate, especially in a safe and remote environment like theirs, where everybody survived by just putting in a little effort. Life was not overly complicated and dangerous. Her parents didn't own a field, but they were not paupers. Through sheer hard work, they accumulated a flock of livestock. Proceeds from milk, hide, egg, dung, and meat promised a bright future for the lovers and their offspring. After Wamboi's birth, the couple could no longer get any, and the years flew by. The pressure fell on the father to produce a heir, because life would be futile if he wouldn't beget a male child to tend his compound long after he was gone and his daughter married off. He did what men do in Africa. He took another woman, much younger than himself or his first, and more active too. 5 years later, no male child's cry was heard in the compound. What was heard were stories of the mysterious disease. First, the young wife was growing pale and frail, with malignant sores all over her body. She coughed as though she would bring forth her intestines. No matter what anybody did, she got worse every day, until she gave up. The couple had little time to mourn as they began recognizing the same symptoms. Very slowly, it dawned on the community that even they were going to die. They eventually did, leaving young Wamboi in the care of her only living relative, her 80-year-old maternal grandmother, Shosho, as she was fondly called. By now, whatever resources and wealth her parents ever owned evaporated with them, as they spent everything in the quest for a remedy. Traditionally, little Wamboi, as young as she was, understood, though shabbily, what position nature had put her in. She was orphaned, impoverished, lonely, and stigmatized. Shosho took her in the neighboring Sagana community. Though Shosho's body and mind constantly failed her, and how the world works continuously confuses her, she managed to throw a thick cushion over the young girl and help alleviate and dissipate her shock. But she left almost immediately after 2 years. Again, Wamboi was left alone, victimized once again by death. After Shosho's interment, a few neighbors took her in literally. They introduced her into the life of farm work and hard work. They donated food and spent time with her in Shosho's hut during the night, trying their best to soothe the young girl who had seen so much brutality. She belonged there now, as the stigma waiting for her at her birthplace assumed mammoth proportions. But as the months passed, the donations dwindled and the company decreased. They had done what they believed was humanly possible for them. But indeed, no one could imagine what the poor girl was going through, from when she was told she was the reason another woman would share her parents' home because she was not a boy, to the death and subsequently the rejection and loneliness. Now at 14, she found emancipation in the fields, toiling away her past and sorrow, and grateful for the chance to mix with the people of the fields. She carried on like this for a couple of years, but deep inside, Wamboi housed emptiness and bitterness that could neither be filled nor diluted by anything or anybody known to her. It was worse at night, lying in Shosho's bamboo bed, eyes fixed on the grass ceiling. Previously, tears could provide some solace because they drained her emotions fluids, and the drowsy after effect was a potent sleeping pill. But as time passed, her emotions lost their fluid and she couldn't drain anymore. So, when she discovered Changa, she lacked the euphoria. It caused her to delve deeper into her pain, but it also had the magical power to soothe her almost immediately. It lifted her and helped her blotting the edges of the dagger of her history, which poked her soul without ceasing. In the following months, she found the balance that she craved for, working very hard during the day and retiring to the brew at night. She kept it very secret and would not indulge until it was evident that there would not be any more chances of human contact. It was the last thing she did before bed. She didn't binge. She only took the dose necessary to numb her pain. She didn't associate it with joy or happiness. It was just an escape, a lubricant for the friction in her mind and soul. The indulgence, however, posed no direct danger. People in her circle discovered a brighter one boy, livelier and blossoming, but they attributed it to adolescence. They suspected that the hormonal process of the stage was now playing a part in the girl's emotional emancipation and liberation. And it seemed so because, at that time, she started to experience some bodily additions. The mango-shaped moans on her chest and the curves of her waist. The additions, more than any other thing in her history, broke down the stigma that plagued her and fetched her friends and admirers, both males and females. One boy's acceptance amongst the young and free in Sagana grew as the years passed. She managed to tie a bond of friendship with two girls, Gadoni and Nyawira. Gadoni was a fellow field handmaid, while Nyawira was the daughter of a wealthy field owner. Their union was nothing too deep anyway. It was more like a usual hookup of teens. But somehow, the trio always had stories and experiences of interest to one another, and they shared and enjoyed when they were together. The three girls brought three elements to the union, elements that served as binders and spices that balanced the trio's personalities. Gadoni was the most sexually experienced and exposed of the three, growing up in a lower class family of 9 children. Her childhood could be considered normal, not as chaotic and tragedy-laden as one boy's. She had just finished her primary education, but going further would be determined by her parents' willingness and ability to carry the cost. That is why she considered the number of siblings she had as a disadvantage, because she knew other families of the same financial status as theirs, but with a smaller number of children who could afford to give their girls secondary school education. Another disadvantage of her family size, which Gadoni did not recognize or consider a disadvantage, was that she had not been given close parental observation and supervision. Somehow, parental guidance eluded her transition from childhood to adolescence, and there was no guarantee she would get it as she moved to young adulthood. Her parents did not lack the discipline and values, but the ability to instill them. But it was just impossible to give it to too many individuals simultaneously. They tried, indeed, because they gave it to their first 3 children and relaxed or hoped they could help instill the virtues in their younger siblings. But nothing is promised in a world inclined to emancipation and constantly celebrates freedom. The moral and character gradation amongst Gadoni's siblings was from top to bottom. Gadoni occupied the 7th position on the ladder and lived wild, young, and free. This was the element she brought to the trio. She had a better experience than the rest of being a girl their age and having relations with people of the opposite sex. She was the go-to person for inquiries about boy-girl relations. She had many contacts and relationships, and this awed her friends. She would draw lessons and references from her escapades and advise anybody willing to tap into her rich knowledge base. Nyawira did not exactly share the Shamba background of her 2 friends. She was more of a township girl, the only daughter of a prosperous farmer and landowner who only visited the countryside during holidays. She was an inspiration to her friends, and they looked up to her as a more current and up-to-date version of themselves. She had many stories of the city, the well-lit nights, beautiful parks, school holiday camp experiences. She even owned a mobile phone, which was not a girly feat to her friends. Nyawera could boast a few episodes with a few city boys, but they were all nothing. Nothing Gadoni would be proud of. Just normal boy-girl friendships without the after-school dates. When Gadoni had her loss of virginity to show, Nyawera had romantic cards and success cards, but her respect and place with her friends had never been in question. One boy was, by far, the most unfortunate of the three. She couldn't match Gadoni's experience or beat Nyawera's exposure, but she had uncommon endurance and wisdom for her age, partly because of her stay with Shosho and partly because she spared her own life. Her friends respected that, not because they could appreciate her story and journey fully, but because she tells each what their parents would have. Anyone could confide in her about any matter and count on her for solid advice. She was the ultimate counselor. But she had also been cleverly secretive. She cleverly kept her loneliness and emptiness away from her friends. Her Shanghai formula had proved very potent, more potent than the comfort humans bring. Gadoni once picked a stench while walking with her, but she did not give it serious thought because the idea of one boy doing the brew sounded plain stupid. She thought that her friend might have just been opening up and enjoying male company. Maybe she had made contact with a heavily doused male. However, a couple of weeks later, she picked the scent again, but this time she made a joke openly about it. Where were Wamboi? Uyu ni nani? She poked. Wamboi had just completed a column of the mound and was clearly out of breath. Ati? She managed to squeeze out. Uyu jama ni nani? Wewe. She pushed again, placing two hands on her hip and making no effort to hide the curious look on her face. Wamboi looked up. She assessed her friend's posture and stance and knew she demanded answers for whatever she wanted to squeeze off her. But she didn't know yet. She stood up from her bench position, let go of the heavy hoe, took in some air. Gani, she fired back at her friend. You tell me, Gadoni shouted. The other week, while we were clearing this place, I smelled alcohol on your clothes. I can smell it again now. Where? Which one have you been seeing? For a moment, Wamboi panicked. She felt a rumble in her stomach. For the first time, someone was about to bust her. But she quickly collected herself and cleverly played along her friend's line of questioning. She smiled, then burst into laughter. Gadoni settled on a finished mound, thrilled, ears itching, waiting for her friend to recover from the laughing fit and feed her ears the story. But it was only a clever act to buy time and to contort a story which would ultimately divert the poker's mind and dissuade any suspicion about her indulgence. After a few seconds, she relaxed and sat on a mound beside her friend. His name is Njoroge, she lied. Gadoni ran the name in her registry and shook her head, showing she had no record of it. I know you don't know him, Wamboi cut in. He is from the neighboring town. He followed me as I was going home one evening. I didn't like him, but he is very funny. He said he will take me to his town. Now Gadoni was grinning from chain to chain. I think he is nice, she continued. How old is he? Gadoni asked. I don't know. Should I ask him? Yes, she replied, and Wamboi nodded to that. Have you done it? No, Wamboi emphasized. I only went with him to his friend's house. They have a lot of city food and alcohol. We ate, and then he told me stories. But he drinks a lot. He tells me he only does that when we are together. Aki Gadoni, those people are nice. Her friend was now flowing with the story and didn't like when she paused. She gave her a pinch on her arm to nudge her on, and she shouted at the sting. One boy recognized that her friend wanted more of the story, only that she was running out of lies, and she laughed some more, sheepishly. "Did you bring him to your house?" Gadoni pushed again. "No," came the reply. "Did you do it?" "No." "Then why are you smelling like that?" "I don't know. Maybe it was because he held me in his arms." Gadoni laughed. Wewe, she taunted, and she laughed some more, sheepishly. Now they could see other work group members returning from a visit to the nearby duka for refreshments. Gadoni stood up, imposing over one boy who still sat on a mound. "Wewe, sawa, twende kazi. You will tell me more in the evening." One boy was relieved it was over and wondered how the stench followed her to the farm. She heaved a huge sigh of relief, and work continued as soon as the other members joined them. One boy continued with her drinking, adding more effort at concealing the stench and any other sign the world might see. The drinking also became heavier as the days passed. She relaxed into the comfort it brought her and became more comfortable with its other pleasant effects. Indeed, it loosened her and made her more accepting of life's pleasures. As her addiction increased, she sensed she must not always be seen at the liquor shop, so she considered accepting the friend request extended by the dealer's son. She calculated that he would be willing to buy her brew and even more willing to deliver it to her in person. It worked, and with it came other pleasures. One evening, after the day's work, one boy retired with the bundle of firewood she had collected. She stacked them in a heap next to the fireplace, made essentially of 3 stones, approximately the size of a human head, placed in a triangular fashion with small spaces in between for firewood. A small basket of metal wire hung from the mabati shade over the fireplace so that the meat and fish in the basket got indirect heat from the fire in the fireplace. That way, they are preserved. She then removed the previous cook's ash from the fireplace. She wanted to prepare mokimo for supper. Just as she settled down to the task, she heard the wooden gate at the front yard creak. She had company. As she was about to strain her ears for more clues, a call came through. "Hodi!" She could tell it was Mwangi. He had become regular at one boy's place, a perfect company for the girl. "Karibu!" She returned as she proceeded to rid her hands off the ash so she could open the front gate. Mwangi stood there, clutching a bottle of shanga in his right hand and a lump of nyama, wrapped in dried leaves, in his left. His eyes were wide, yet nothing could be read from them. One boy had wondered why she couldn't tell what he was thinking from looking into his eyes, as Gadoni taught her. No matter what he did or said, his eyes were always blank, almost bleak, devoid of emotion. She let him in, and he handed her over the gifts. One boy thanked him, still searching his eyes for clues of any emotion. The only activity in his face was a one-sided grin. He sat on the tiny stool, and she sat on her wooden bed. He inquired about her day's work, and she confirmed it went well, as usual. They spoke for a while about the weather and recent happenings in the town. Mwangi got up and reached for the bottle of shanga, which one boy had kept in a corner on the floor. She pointed him to a plastic cup inverted next to an old jagged toothbrush. He reached for it and blew some air to sanitize it and rid it of dust. He poured himself a quarter of the cup and poured it all at once. Nothing in his behavior pointed to the scorching effect of the liquid as he handed one boy the cup and settled on the stool again. "Nahis in jar," she started. "I was about to clean the fireplace and cook mokimo before you came." "Are you hungry?" she inquired. He shrugged, then touched his stomach with both hands as if to gauge the content. "I ate ugali about 3 hours ago," he replied. "But you know, a man is always hungry." He joked. One boy nodded slowly as if it made sense to her. She lifted the bottle with one hand to ascertain the level of the content. She placed it back down and reached back for it almost immediately. She poured herself some, replaced the lid, and kept it in the same spot. She sipped on, savoring the hotness as it made its way down her alimentary canal, and she shivered to the effect. Mwangi, who had been watching in silence, affirmed that it was good for her as it would help disinfect her stomach. Almost immediately, there was a holiness in her sight, and she felt momentarily afloat, but the feeling vanished as quickly as it started. She stood. "I was about to clear the fireplace and make some mokimo before you entered," she repeated. "Oh, mokimo. I like it," exclaimed Mwangi. "Sawa, I will continue. Give me some time." She reached inside her metal box and extracted one of those city magazines with pictures of famous people. It was a gift from Nyawera. Presenting it to her visitor was also derived from one of Nyawera's stories. The magazine had a bold picture of Anna Kosgei on the cover, and she pointed at the portrait as she handed it to him. Mwangi accepted the magazine and said asante. Although he couldn't read, he started to flip through the pages, nodding his head as he recognized more faces in the magazine. He became absorbed as one boy made for the backyard to continue with her cooking. As she cooked, there was ginger in her spirit. When she was home and alone, cooking supper was a boring routine. This time, she was generally lively, humming a tune softly to herself. She had wondered what Mwangi thought of her, or if he liked her, but it was not for her to ask. She would continue searching his eyes, and one day, hopefully, she would find the answers. She didn't need to search herself and prove the fact that she had gone from feeling indifferent to feeling involved with him. It was a warm and assuring feeling. Thinking of him had become something that provided her happiness. She wished for him to say more to her about how he felt. She also wished to hear him say things that Gadoni and Nyawera had told her about boys wooing girls. Mwangi dropped the bottle topping accidentally, and the rattle brought her back from her thoughts. She imagined he must be helping himself again from the bottle he had brought. So she called out to him, "Mwangi, you have to leave some for me." "Sawa sawa," he replied. "Asante, karibu," he returned. After about 10 minutes, she was done. She promptly removed the steaming pot from the fire and served the meal on 2 plates. She sprinkled water on the burning firewood to put out the fire and heat. They ate in silence until Mwangi demanded water. She served him, and he thanked her and complimented her culinary skill. They continued the meal in silence, but the silence was once again broken by a rumble from the sky. Both lifted their heads, looking at the rough ceiling as if they could see through it. "I knew it would rain," she mumbled with a mouthful of mokimo. Mwangi nodded profusely. He didn't utter a word, and nothing in his body language suggested he was in a hurry. When they emptied their plates, one boy took them away. When she returned, she drank some water and sat on her bed. Having filled his belly, Mwangi could afford to give life to the other urge swelling like an untamed river inside him. He got up from his stool and sat next to her. He wasn't exactly sure how his advances would be understood or interpreted. His heart started racing, and he felt his head swell, owing to the flood of thoughts it housed. However, he had to continue. Intuition is to be trusted in situations like this, and it had told him something positive. He placed a hand on the girl's knee, a tactical move. He could advance to higher and softer parts if the gesture is welcome, but if it is repelled, he could retreat with his pride intact and afford to try another day. One boy also felt a flood of emotions rush through her as he began his advances. She had waited for him to make a move and exorcise her of her adolescent and sexual demons. She felt good that it is finally happening. but worried about the consequences because she knew such an act could end up terrible for her. She battled with her little inner voice and felt Mwangi's hand work its way up her thigh. Her heart exploded, and her head felt light. She looked at him, trying to probe his eyes in the dim light, but all she could see was that curtain she knew perfectly, hiding his emotions, almost making it impossible to believe he was feeling and doing what he was doing. The only indicator of his intention was his hand, which had worked its way to her upper body. Now it clutched her breasts, pressed firmly against the firm mold of flesh. A soft gasp escaped her, barely audible but deafening to Mwangi, who understood the emotion that produced it. He also accepted it as a prompt. He now used both hands, peeling articles of clothing off her, feeling, pressing, and clutching as she lay on her back. It had started to rain also. The showers did a lot to shower down the temperature in the room. Its contact with the thatched roof produced a cacophony of sweet sounds, and the room's occupants tapped into the subtle energy the rain drizzled. The occasional rumble of thunder provided bars for their erotic song, which they sang to each other without shame or restraint, with one boy being more vocal of the two. When it ended, they lay still, side by side, tired and spent, staring at the roof. When her senses returned, she quickly got up and scrambled for her clothes. She put them on and went behind to fetch kerosene so she could top up and refill the lantern. When she returned, Mwangi was struggling into his clothes. "Unajisikia aje, mrembo?" he inquired. She nodded twice, choosing to concentrate on the lantern. "Will you still be working on Muzea's farm tomorrow?" He pressed further. She repeated the nodding gesture. "Sawa sawa, I will see you when you come back." "Sawa sawa, asante," she replied. He approached the window and opened it halfway, but before he could go any further, she gave her the answer he was looking for. "It has stopped raining. It's just drizzling." "Oh, sawa, I will be leaving then. Nitakuona baadaye." Wambui did not respond verbally to that. She got up from working on the lantern and held it against his face, wishing that the curtain was breached. She could see a faint glow in his eyes and a full smile on his lips. So she smiled. "Sawa, Mwangi. Lala salama," she bid him. "Asante, mrembo. Atawewe," he returned. He stepped up and hugged her, then made for the door. She followed him and made him step aside so she could open it. They both stepped into the muddy compound. She repeated the process when they approached the front gate, and Mwangi vanished into the night. Mwangi continued his visit to Wambui's hut. For months, their rendezvous continued. It also assumed a sneak-in, sneak-out manner, so it was not very popular. It never made it to the news bulletin of the town. Wambui still worked at farms, and Mwangi in his father's brew house. They still used the brew to smoothen their time together, and life continued. It had to. Wambui shared the Mwangi secret with his friends. They were elated that at last, finally, she opened up to someone, but they weren't exactly ecstatic about Mwangi. To them, he wasn't exactly one of the most colorful male birds around, and the fact that he made changa for a living didn't fetch him a fair mark on the girls' score sheet, and they pointed it out to their friend. "I know he is usually quiet," asserted Gadoni as they returned from another girl's traditional wedding. "But I also know he drinks a lot of that stuff," she continued. "Has he invited you to their house?" Wambui shook her head. "Sawa, you make sure he knows what he's doing," she concluded. "Sawa sawa, mama," Wambui cajoled, and Nyawira burst out laughing at the response. She was clueless when it came to matters of homeboys. She didn't even know the Mwangi person or what he looked like. Her closest picture of him was his father's pub, which she had passed a few times, so she associated the pub's rowdiness with the boy. When they approached Gadoni's compound, they met her immediate elder sister out in front. She wasn't feeling well and did not attend the marriage function. The friends greeted her and asked how she was feeling. She asserted she was feeling better, but felt generally tired. She also pointed out that the mix of herbs she took had gone a long way to dampen her fever. The friends contributed a generous dose of pole for her. Asanteni, she thanked them. Wewe, Wamboi, you promised me some fruits, she pressed. Aki pole, Wamboi started. I'll bring them tomorrow morning on my way to the farm. Which ones would you like? Which one can I get? She returned. Oranges, mangoes, bananas, and maybe some pineapple. Sawa, whatever you can fetch is fine. Mrembo, Asante Sana, she concluded. The two bade Gadoni goodbye and continued drifting towards their homes. Wamboi walked Nyawera to their house and then returned to hers. It had been a long day, and she looked forward to a hearty dose of shanga and mwangi in the evening. After about a year since Wamboi and Mwangi started seeing each other, the fun hit a dead end. A lot of the magic it had was lost. Now it is one dull affair. When it started, they saw each other every night. Then it became once in days. And now, maybe once a month. But like almost everything in life, the thirst or zeal dissipates with time. Even Nyawera pointed it to her friend when she complained. A few months earlier, Mwangi's father, the town's most successful brewman and pub owner, died. After his interment, Mwangi saw most of the responsibility of the family business sit squarely on his shoulder. He became busier and more involved than he had ever been. But the truth remains that he was never committed to the relationship with Wamboi. And the sudden turn of events in his family and business provided him with the perfect escape. He stopped being the friend he was to the girl. On a few occasions he was with her, he would exaggerate the challenges and responsibilities he had, all to let the girl know he didn't have the time and couldn't be there the way he used to be. It was evident to Wamboi that he had other women and girls. Not that she cared or wanted him all for herself, but it made her jealous anyway, and she constantly wondered if he shared stories of their time with his drunk and rowdy male friends. Sometimes late at night, she pictured and imagined Mwangi having fun and going on with his life, not caring about how she felt or holding back any details about her. She slowly understood more about the disparity in both sexes, that the shame and blame tilted more to her kind. She felt powerless over these fears and emotions. And despite all this, if he came to her door right then, she would still let him in. And she did when he showed up, until he got her pregnant. It started like a dream caused by some malaria fever. She noticed the changes, the morning sickness and the absence of her menstrual flow. She tried to keep it to herself, but as the days turned to weeks, she could not deny that a significant transformation was sweeping through her body. Gadoni held her head in shock, just utterly speechless. Her reaction didn't depict disdain for pregnancy, just that the man in question did not hold the promise most girls would be proud of. During the early stages, Wamboi, disorientated and confused, relied on her friends, especially Gadoni, for direction and consolation. "Have you told him?" she poked her as they sat in front of Wamboi's hut one evening. Wamboi stared into space as if she didn't hear her friend. Gadoni hesitated a bit and repeated herself, her voice a bit lower this time. Wamboi responded with a head-shaking gesture. Gadoni hissed lightly and stared at the ground as they remained silent for about 30 seconds. Then Wamboi spoke without removing her gaze from the space before her. "I don't know how," she began. "I don't know how to tell him." "Wamboi, but you have to let him know," Gadoni pressed. "You just have to." Wamboi hissed. She started to draw incoherent patterns on her palm. "Okay," she managed to say. Gadoni heaved a deep sigh and spat on the ground. That tells the gravity and nervousness of the moment. "I will tell him," Wamboi started, "but something tells me he may deny it. He has been different. Lately, he is too busy. It's been weeks since I saw him. Sawa, I will pass by his pub, she concluded. Yes, make sure you see him directly. But don't tell him there. Just tell him to see you for something serious and urgent, Gadoni directed. Sawa, she agreed. At that point, she broke down in tears. Hot, free-flowing fluids of regret escaped her eyes. Fingers locked together, squeezing an imaginary object. The outburst infected Gadoni, and tears welled up in her eyes. But she got control of herself and cleaned it off with a loose end of her kikoi. She put an arm around her friend and drew her to herself. She let her sob and vent her sorrow for about 2 minutes. When she finally got off the feet, she used the loose end of her kikoi to wipe her face and cheeks. Gadoni had anticipated this from the day she understood her friend was spending time with Mwangi and that she had been on Changa. She knew nothing remarkable would come out of it. She didn't have the power to change anything. She could not outrightly condemn her friend's man and habit. However, she joked and taunted her at the slightest chance she got. That was her whip, and she cracked it. But she kept her promise not to tell the city girl, Nyawera. When one boy calmed down, she led her in and sat her briefly on her bed. The episode unfolding was laden with pain and grief, considering the circumstances surrounding it. But Gadoni had seen it all with her elder sister. She can predict all the stages and cycles her friend would pass through. But the worst case scenario would be the measure used in her sister's case. But she also knew she couldn't suggest it now. First things would come first. Mwangi would be notified and his reaction ascertained. I want to go now, Wamboi started suddenly. Where? Gadoni queried. To the pub. Let me talk to him. Now? Gadoni queried further, and Wamboi nodded consistently, silently voicing her conviction. Gadoni sprang to her feet without further probe and closed the windows and back door. When they both stepped out of the hut, she also closed the front door and gate, and they strolled towards the pub. It was getting dark by the time the girls approached the pub. The music of JB Maina could be heard from several meters, blasting off a broken speaker, noisy and very unappealing to the ear, making a cajole of the hit track. The pub's occupants were either not perturbed or too deadened by alcohol consumption. A couple of voices could also be heard singing along to the famous track. A middle-aged man could be seen holding a more mature female counterpart, dancing away their sorrows. As the two friends approached, the unmistakable stench of alcohol greeted them. They stood at the entrance, scouting the premises for signs of Mwangi. Their presence was noticed, especially by a group sitting a few steps from the entrance, and they also set about making their presence noticed by the girls. A member of another group of 5 called out to the girls, Where? Kuja hapa? When no response came, a younger group member approached them. He grabbed Gadoni's arm. The gesture resulted in a forceful and near-violent withdrawal of her arm. Choosing not to use their mouths in their defense, the girls produced very sharp eye whips, which must have been very painful to the intruder, and they withdrew as fast as he came, and the girls continued their visual hunt. Almost immediately, Gadoni tapped her friend's arm to get her attention, and when she turned to look at her friend, she pointed to the direction on their right hand. Mwangi was emerging from a door from one of the inner rooms in the pub, clutching 2 jugs of his liquid gold. He was unaware of the girl's presence, so they waited for him to approach. Even as he got near them, he was so bent on dispensing that dose to his testing customers that he still failed to see the girls. That's when Wamboi called, Mwangi! But no response came. Mwangi! She called again, raising her voice a notch. Mwangi turned to behold the girls. If he was surprised, no one could tell because he did not show it, but he proceeded to hand the jugs to one of his pub hands and dashed towards the girls. As he approached, the girls went outside, way beyond the torture of the discordant blasts. Habari zenu, he hailed as he joined them. No response came from the girls. "I can see you are busy," one boy started. "Can you come to my place? I want to tell you something." "Hiya, Mrimbo. Askia. Sema," Wang responded, pretending not to hear the first part of her sentence. "Mwangi, you have to go to her place," Gadoni cut in with a very stern voice. Hiya. Is everything okay?" he asked. The girls offered no response. "Sawa, I cannot come," he started, but was interrupted by a call from inside the pub. He turned from the girls to ascertain who was calling, but it was too dark to pick out the caller from the dimly lit pub, so he just called back, Nakuja, and continued, "I cannot come today, but I will try to come tomorrow evening," he concluded. "Just come tomorrow evening, it's important," Gadoni pushed. Sawa, I will come," he promised. The girls exchanged looks, contented that their message had been sent, then turned away without saying anything more. Mwangi stood there, watching their backs as they faded into the night, wondering what the visit aim could be. When he could no longer make out their figures, he shrugged and sauntered back to his waiting patients. 2 days later, he got the news. As usual, his countenance gave no clue about how he felt. He lacked words. Even when Wambui cried, he could not find words to soothe her. When he finally opened his mouth, it made incoherent sounds. Wambui quickly dried her eyes as if her tears would hinder her ability to hear. But he wasn't saying anything. He appeared more confused than her, scratching his head and staring at the floor. How did it happen? He managed to ask, but he got no reply. When? He came again, but still got no reply. What do we do now? He continued. The question removed the lead on Wambui's emotions, and she burst out crying again. The tears flowed, and she lamented incoherently. Mwangi made no effort to console her as he stared into space. "I will take you to see someone," he stated. If she heard him, she did not show it because she continued sobbing. "I said I will take you to see someone," he repeated. "She will look at you to see if your words are valid." Wambui raised her gaze from the floor and fixed it on him, dousing tears from her eyes while wiping the rest of her cheeks. He returned the gaze as he nodded slowly and continuously to affirm his speech. "Who?" Wambui managed to ask. "Wipe your tears. Tomorrow I will pass by at this time. You explain it to her how you feel, and she will look at you. I think she will tell us what to do," he continued, ignoring her question. "Don't come to the pub," he continued. "I will pass by exactly at this time, Kesho." She again doused tears off her eyes with the tip of her kanga. Mwangi indicated he was leaving, but no response came from her, so he stood up and casually strode to the front door. He diffused through it and made for the front gate. The sound the gate made as he closed it confirmed that he was gone and that their conversation had been over for that day. She stood up, intending to pace around her room, but found out, surprisingly, that she lacked the strength, so she sat back almost immediately. Her life has grounded to a halt in the last few days. She had lost sense of time and had not been to the farm and left people wondering. A couple of her fellow field hands had called out to her from the front gate, either on their way to farm or back from work, but she greeted them with silence. It wouldn't be long before they became seriously worried or alarmed. Therefore, she may not be able to hide forever. Finally, she summoned the strength to get up. She went behind for her bucket, then filled it halfway with water from her neighbor's well. As she showered, she hoped that as the cold water washed down her body temperature and filth, it would do so to the latest worry plaguing her. The next day at noon, Mwangi strode into her compound as he had promised. The bond between the two had broken down completely, and the chemistry they once had became very much absent. The only thing bonding them was the new situation, the latest development. He did not bother to go into her hut. Instead, he just knocked on the front door to announce his presence while urging her to get ready as he waited outside. When Wambui joined him, they strolled off into the hot afternoon. He took her in the direction of the Mathioi River. There, in a lonely hut, lived Shosho Mogore, 85 years old, daughter of Warimo and granddaughter of Waithera, both acclaimed herbalists and gifted natural remedy givers. Mogore combined her dexterity with a rare gynecological prowess. She dedicated her life to the understanding of complications during gestation and, more importantly, during birth. Hers was a divine call and gift, and indeed, she was a gift to her time, because countless families owe the lives of their women and children to her. She rarely charged money. She never tied her solutions to monetary equivalents. Her prize was complete trust and faith in her methods. Mwangi made Wambui join the queue of women waiting for a session with Shosho while he went further down the river. He sat there, entertaining himself with berries until Wambui had her session and joined him. Sema, he urged her. She confirmed it, Mwangi. I am pregnant. Someone is growing inside me, she said. What do we do? She continued. He ignored the question. Instead, he offered her fruit from the handful he had gathered. She removed her gaze from his eyes, lowered it to his right hand holding the fruit, and replaced it again. Mwangi could feel the scorch from the gaze. What do we do? She pressed on. What do you mean, what do we do? He spat at her. Do you want a baby? Wambui, ask yourself if you want a baby, because I don't. Wait for the right time. I will arrange for it to be removed, he concluded. Ati? She spat. You heard me, he shot back. He stood up and angrily kicked at the small stack of fruits he had gathered earlier, sending them bouncing speedily down the hill in all directions. Without saying another word, he fetched his shirt from a nearby tree where he had hung it. He struggled into it as he went uphill the way they came, abandoning Wambui and their conversation. She sat there, gazing at the fast-flowing river, unable to cry anymore. Surprisingly, she wasn't feeling lonely. She could feel a presence deep inside her, which fed her hope, but she craved for courage and support. Later that day, as the sun began to hide behind the horizon, she retired to her hut. As she approached the extensive clearing just at the corner, along the road leading to her place, where small kids usually gather to play, she cornered one of the boys. Unajua duka ya Mwangi? She queried him. The child nodded. Chukua hii pesa. Enda ununuliwe changa tafadhali, she urged him. As the boy hesitated, clearly disturbed by the rude interruption of his participation in the game, she produced a 5 shillings coin, which she handed him as an inducement, and the lad sped off in the direction of the liquor shop without further hesitation. She continued her drift into her hut and laid on her bed when she came in, staring at the ceiling. Her entire escapade with Mwangi flashed through her eyes. Fast, vivid flashes of moments and times spent. It filled her with resentment. She resented her life. She resented Mwangi. She resented the fact that she had to work at the field. She resented her friends and whatever was growing inside her. All she wanted to do was to pour herself a big shot of the brew and shoot her sorrow through the ceiling. Deep inside, she knew that her life would never be the same, and the direction it would take would be very uncertain, beyond her control, because She had grown weary and tired of living. Over the years, she had tried to be strong. Indeed, she was strong and had tried to do what was right and carry on with people and life. But look what life has dished her. Was she different from the other girls who went around having fun and not being scourged by pregnancy? The boy returned with the liquor, and his knock on the door jolted her from her thoughts and sorrow. She took it from him as she opened the door halfway and closed it almost immediately to his face. The boy ran off as this was evidence that their contract was over. She reached for her cup and poured herself a large ration. She cursed out loud as she poured it down her throat. It was too dilute for the kick she yearned for. She placed the bottle and its remains close to her bed and lay down. She could feel herself float to and fro, as if a calm body of water suspended her, and her thoughts roamed wildly into the night. One boy slipped deeper into an abyss of loneliness and depression as the days rolled by. She stopped going to the fields. All she did was stay indoors and douse herself in the brew. Her belly broke the news as the days turned to weeks and the weeks into months. Gadoni was incredibly supportive. She offered words and resources. Above all, she provided a shoulder for her friend to lean and cry on. In the 8th month of her gestation, one boy gave birth to a healthy boy. The day had started typically for her. She woke up a little bit after sunrise. She did her chores in her compound and went further to complete the ones she ran for her wealthy neighbors. These earned her milk for the day and other favors. At noon, Gadoni visited to check on her and to taught her further about how her belly seemed to grow more every day. She also brought her some fruits and encouraged her to eat more of them instead of the brew. As the day progressed, Gadoni suggested they go for a walk. They agreed to walk up to the playground and roam around before making their way back again, as it would help one boy exercise as she gets close to labor and delivery. As soon as they walked out of the front gate, one boy felt a sharp pang of pain on her waist. The sheer force of it bent her over. She stayed that way for some seconds as she tried to absorb the pain, but it came again, amplified and lingering. She leaned on her friend as she let out a loud moan. Gadoni was rattled and she asked if she could continue, but no response came from one boy as she remained stiff, and the pain would torment her again if she tried to move any part of her body. Let's go back, Gadoni decided. You have to lie down for some moments, she concluded. One boy nodded in agreement, but as they were about to turn around, one boy brought her friend's attention to her legs. As she looked, she noticed some fluid down her laps and legs, and a scream escaped Gadoni. Even Wambui panicked and hastily urged her friend to help her back into her hut. Gadoni's scream drew 2 women passing by at that moment, and they rushed to help take Wambui inside. There, they helped relax and put her in a position as they confirmed she had just lost her water and that labor was about to set in. The women opted to stay with Wambui, while the less experienced Gadoni went to fetch the nearest midwife, a student of the great Shosho. By the time they arrived at the hut, nascent wails of the baby could be heard. The midwife presided over the rest of the procedure. Wambui cried at the sight of the tiny baby. It was a boy. She laid him on her chest as the woman cleaned her up. She cleaned his forehead with her trembling hands, ridding it of most of the blood, hot tears cascading down her cheeks. The midwife took him from her and proceeded to clean him up. She produced a piece of cloth and wrapped him up, then handed him to her again. She took him and whispered into his ears, "Maina." Gadoni read her lips and said it aloud, and all the women in the room cheered and congratulated the mother and son. Indeed, it was a beautiful sight to watch. The young woman cuddled her fidgety son as he suckled tenderly and clung to her tenaciously. Occasionally, he would attempt to cry, but she would rock him gently, and he would ditch the idea and naturally enjoy her warmth and embrace. The only thing not beautiful that brought an invisible stain to the ambience of the moment was the stench and smell of alcohol in the room. It produced doubt about the continual affection and guidance of the mother and severe questions about the son's future. Chapter 3. Maina. Maina endured a harrowing 2-hour ride from his roots in Sagana in the company of 2 other runaway boys. They sat through the torture in a sealed truck packed with sukuma wiki for the city's consumption. They arrived at the Markiti market to be greeted by chaos and rowdiness. As soon as the driver's aide opened the back latch, a flood of light besieged their vision, and so did a crowd of sukuma wiki buyers. Still dazed by the sudden surge of humans and elements, the children had to be prompted into action, and somehow found their center of gravity and commenced offloading the vegetables. As they walked, the waiting crowd increased in volume and number, and the driver made contact with Karanja, the supposed custodian of the children. "Hey, Karanja! Atirere!" he started. "Haya, uko wapi? Nimefika Nairobi. Niko na mbio baba, fika haraka," he concluded. Karanja had assured him he was already on his way to meet him. True to his words, he arrived just as the sun was leaving the sky. He handed the driver a wand of scrubbed 50 and 100 shillings notes, disguised in a handshake. Both men casually strolled about 5 meters away from the now subsiding commotion and stood face to face as they talked. Just affirmations and nods, like they already have an understanding. It ended with a firm handshake, and they walked side by side back to the truck, and Karanja immediately herded the children into a waiting tuk-tuk. They traveled for about 45 minutes and arrived at Congo in Kawangware in the outskirts of Nairobi city. As they alighted, they were joined by an older boy and promptly guided into a standalone mabati hut already inhabited by 2 other boys of pre-teen age. Karanja did no talking at this point. He had delegated all the talking to the teenage boy who they met outside. He was just there to make sure the children were settled in. And as soon as they were, he signaled the older boy to meet him outside. He handed him a 500 shillings note and sauntered off into the night. As the home prefect, he was responsible for buying food and the essential things the boys might need. For the better part of the night, the prefect set about orientating the boys. No one talks to the boss Karanja directly. No one asks questions. No one complains. And no one dares run away. The new boys were instructed to learn the house rules from the 2 boys already inhabiting the hut and to figure out a way to squeeze into the only bed on the floor for the night. Karanja Munene was all about money. He rose from the depths of poverty to run a successful vegetable and foodstuff distribution network in the city of Nairobi. He started with a mkokoteni. Then he graduated from using a bicycle for his daily deliveries to using a boda boda. This helped him expand his reach within the estates of Nairobi. He indeed presents the picture of a successful small beginner. As the years passed, his hard work paved way for more small successes here and there, and he brought in more people to ensure targets were met, from sourcing, processing, storage, transportation, and delivery. His operation ran like a well-oiled machine, maximizing profits by prudently deploying resources and tapping into or plugging any duct that promises gain or wastage, respectively. So, in keeping wastage occasioned by expiring or rotting supplies in check, Karanja had devised a way of importing the disenfranchised young from the rural parts of the country. He would go for orphaned street children, the abused, vulnerable strays, and runaways. These he puts into direct use in hawking excess produce. Usually, Those were leftovers from the delivery section of the business to prevent them from rotting away as losses to the entire outfit. So these young lads would traverse the inner veins of the settlements and residences, calling on residents to make convenient buys right on their doorsteps. And it worked. Karanja did not pay the lads for these roles. They got to feed off him once or twice daily, and they would be provided with a tattered roof over their heads. For most of them, it was fair enough, considering that at their age, most of them already knew how it felt to go for days without a meal. Maina learned how to fit into his new life as the days passed. He learned from the other kids he had met at the hut. They barely spoke to each other, so he just watched and learned from what they did. On countless occasions, he had tried to talk to his fellows, but they wouldn't respond. They just looked away, and he wondered why. But it won't be long until he learns why, as the prefect started extending his brand of hospitality to him and the rest of the recent entrants. Sheer brutality and unprovoked physical abuse. Being a teenage runaway and battling his inner demons and insecurities, he used his younger subjects as a vent for all that dark steam. In the early weeks, he would line them up in the morning, just before they file out for their daily pickups, and dish out slaps to them individually. Then follows an instruction never to let a word of that escape them. Sometimes at night, instead of using words for instruction, he would hit the kids with njeledi to drive his point or instruction. He would not hesitate to deprive anyone who offends or falls out of line a meal. There were times he would threaten to strangle them, one after another, and concluded by letting them know there won't be any consequences for him because they had nobody to fight for them. Once, he slapped the youngest boy right on the left eye for hesitating on the bed after a call for morning rising. The boy got a black eye and some more beating to remind him not to answer questions about it. One day, the boss instructed him to take the children on a familiarization tour of an estate they would want to extend sales to. During the visit, a concerned wife and mother became suspicious and started asking questions about the boy's black eye and other visible marks on the ill-kept children. She was so perturbed and persistent that she invited the attention of other adults in the vicinity. A tiny pocket of bystanders clustered together as they probed and prodded the kids and their evil prefect. As the oldest in the group, it was customary for the prefect to offer explanations. He cleverly explained that they were siblings, that they were born of the same parents. He explained that the youngest boy got the scar from his latest skirmish with the older brother, who coincidentally had a bruised scalp. He ended his defense by allowing the boys to confirm his story by nodding in affirmation. With that, the adults dispersed. Being this close to exposure, he began administering other methods of abuse that left little or no physical evidence. He would flog them on the soles of their feet. That way, no scars were visible. It only left them with deep, almost unbearable pain, which made them partially limp for days. It was also not uncommon to have nights where some were made to sleep while standing. He only allowed them to lean slightly against the cold Mbati wall as they fought off bouts of sleepy dizziness. The list is endless, and the emotional assault and abuse grew with each passing day. It took its toll on the children. They all screamed for help with their eyes. Sometimes, when they were out hawking and making money for the boss, they would stare people right into the eyes as they made a purchase, hoping they would see their pain and rescue them. But people needed their hamburger. The child or the story in their eyes didn't matter to most people. After all, who takes away seconds of their busy lives to stare into the eyes of a tattered stray? Maina cooperated with one of the boys who knew relatives that lived on a dump site. They did what they had been doing all their lives. They ran. Shouts of "Mwizi, Mwizi, Mwizi" broke the silence of the cold July morning. It also jolted Maina out of his one-eyed sleep. He sat up and listened again to ascertain if he was the only one hearing the scream. It rang out again, this time louder than the first. A female raised the alarm, and the distress in her voice was not latent. Maina hesitated again to gauge the reaction of fellow inhabitants of the shanty settlement. If a drunk idler raised the alarm, as is the case sometimes, he would settle back in his tent. As he hesitated, disregarding Jana and the other dogs' non-stop barking, he could feel the commotion and noise starting to build around, so he knew that people were responding to the call. He could hear other people lending their voices and amplifying the call. "Mwizi, Mwizi, Mwizi," they shouted as they raced towards the fleeing offender. He crouched outside his tent but didn't feel like joining the race. Usually, offenders are his dump mates and sometimes his friends who had fallen for the temptation of attacking females who use the side track to access the main road because it is shorter. The trail was sometimes policed by the vigilant Maasai who guard the flats and residences on the other side of the estate. But sometimes, the bad boys acted quickly and got away with it. Therefore, the safety of whoever decided to use the path was not always guaranteed, but neither was the success of the thieves. As he watched, a small crowd began to gather at the very end of the street, an indication that the thief had been apprehended. Now, he imagined who it was and how much beating he would take. The tradition always was when they are caught, the severity of the punishment assumed a mammoth proportion. A jungle type of justice is dished out with the sole intention of discouraging such acts. But once in a while, a boy from the dump would be driven to the extreme by hunger and desperation. The site was situated in the middle of a middle-class settlement and residence, well-built flats with running water and the comforts of modern housing. But the distance in meters from the site to those housing units was not the only thing separating the inhabitants of both worlds. What separated them ran deep into the very nature of human classification and hierarchy. Simply put, the inhabitants of the dump were unfortunate and doomed, while the inhabitants of the flats were everything opposite that. And in our world, the comfortable and well-to-do apparently have the right to detest and protest against the poor, as is the case in this estate named Kayole. The site and its inhabitants were continuously opposed and discriminated against, despite the hidden benefits of their existence. Life was a constant disaster for people there. However, Maina considered it better than life at the hut. But was it? Because sometimes he would wish he could still be guaranteed 1 or 2 meals a day. There are days he would yearn for that mabati roof over his head. Then some of his scars would promptly remind him of the brutality he had endured. His current abode is a tent of used plastic sheets on stick frames, put up on the only piece of land where no monetary obligation is required for land occupied, on a vast refuse dump in Kayole. The site stretches for tens of meters in length and breadth. Maina and a contingent of unfortunates had settled on the site's southern end. That is their home and source of livelihood. Here, Maina had managed to assemble a team, and he led effectively. There was always an air of maturity around him. The boy possessed wisdom and courage beyond his age. It was as if all the suffering and abuse he had faced chastised him and made him stronger. Inside of him dwelled the fire and knowledge that he would be great. How that would become, the boy didn't know, but he always felt it. He knew that his name would be known beyond the refuse site. He knew Jana would be proud of him one day. When rejection and despair reared their ugly, monstrous heads, the giant of hope in his imaginary future wielded the sword of hope, and with that came comfort, peace, and sleep. He dreamed of a destiny that shined bright. The night was dark, but the stars began to file out. He could feel himself among the other stars, 11 of them lined up before tens of thousands of eyes. He was the most admired star, the brightest, and he shone some more. Everyone clamored to touch him, to feel him. He could feel the ease he was not accustomed to. Such fluidity, such triumph. The chants erupted, "Maina, Maina, Maina," and it reached a crescendo and crashed abruptly. Then, he reluctantly opened his eyes. He had been dreaming. Chapter 4. Maina let out two sharp whistling sounds. He made it by twisting the tongue and pushing it against the roof of the mouth. It was directed at his friend Jana, who had accompanied him to a site in Kariobangi. "Shh, shh, shh, Twende," he urged. The dog persisted. She had just torn open a bag of putrid food material and was bent on licking it to the last slimy detail. Maina proceeded anyway. She would catch up with him. He had the sack half filled and needed to have it filled before noon. He also had to check with the restaurants lining the southern end of the popular Cario Junction to see if any had dumped leftover and unwanted food. As he was frolicking through the bin, Jana joined, but he had to watch while his friend did the searching. It had been the routine for both friends. Maina extracted a packet of mokimo and grilled samaki, still fresh enough that he considered it edible, and they sauntered off. They went across the road into an abandoned scrapyard. He settled on a mkoteni and set about opening the package. Jana, salivating and unsettled, managed to settle next to him. He dropped a lump of mokimo and some samaki bone for his friend, and both ate silently. He could feel the slime in the mokimo, but some parts were less slimy, and he concentrated on them. Occasionally, he would remove a slimy part and feed it to Jana, who didn't seem to care. Within minutes, both friends seemed satisfied. Maina sat still and gazed into space while Jana drank from a stagnant pool nearby. He watched her for a while as she slopped away. He then went further into the yard, gathered some corrugated paper sheets, and settled for a midday nap. Within minutes, he was snoring softly with his dog next to him. Not even the boisterous nature of his surroundings, nor his uncomfortable position on the floor would stop him from traveling into his dreamy paradise, where everything was so bright and comfortable. He found himself in the city stadium, still dressed in rags, but everybody's attention seemed to be on him, and there was an easy feeling he could not explain. Everything flowed smoothly. He was neither hungry nor tired, and he loved the attention. Normal people were cheering and applauding him. They said something about him being spectacular. Soon, the ball was passed to him. He could see nobody manning the goalpost, so he hit hard, and it was a goal, and the crowd went wild. "Maina, Maina, Maina, Maina." Soon it was over, and a beautiful girl stood by him. She started to wash his face with a smooth cloth and scented water. It was the reward for something he could not comprehend. Her soft fingers massaged his face. It was better than anything he could remember, but the awkward feeling that came with it is one he can identify in any state, and that jarred him to reality. He opened his eyes to find Jana by his side, licking his face tenderly and voraciously. For a moment, he was dazed by the contrast between reality and where he came from. Maina had stumbled on Jana in his first week living on the dock site. The frightened and overwhelmed boy had not spoken nor been spoken to by anyone for 3 days. His attempts to ask questions and correlate stories of Jijinku he heard back in the village failed woefully. He was lost in the crazy world until Jana came, wagging its tail. Maina immediately saw it in the puppy's eyes, the same feeling of loneliness, the feeling of being a victim, abandoned, detested, protested, and hungry. Though they knew nothing about each other, they found similarities in their situations, and their spirits spoke to each other. Maina reached out and touched her head, neck, and back. He wished he could talk to her and ask her some of his questions, but all it could do was wag its tail and wag it some more. Even though none of her kind around there had a name, he called her Jana, as if he knew their future would be intertwined. The boy and the dog knew nothing about it other than it was laden with uncertainties. But with each other, they could take it on one day at a time. Having been wetted back to reality, Maina picked up his sack of plastic pickings and headed out of the compound. He needed to connect the estates of Buruburu and Umoja before heading back to Kayale to meet the other players of his team. There, they would put their findings together and wait for someone to offer about 150 shillings for their efforts. Chapter 5. As Maina grew and added years to his age, he stuck to his friendship with Jana. He also resisted the urge for shortcuts or crime. He distanced himself from the lads who organized themselves in groups and gangs to participate in mugging and pickpocketing. Most were numbed by drug use. Others were pushed by extreme poverty. Some were just lured. Over the years, he used soccer as a diversion and distraction from misery. He would play with stuffed polythene on the dump site. Sometimes, the voice in his head would encourage him to play with the normal kids on the field, but he would always decline. He was wondering how the normal kids would allow him into their fold, but the voice persisted. "You are just human like them, Maina," it prodded. Maina just shook his head. No matter what he heard, he could never muster enough self-esteem to mingle with the normal boys. He knew enough about rejection already. They would cajole him. Their voices would linger in his mind for weeks. He would be called a chokora to his face, and they may even be violent in their push for him to vanish with his tail in between his legs. However, one evening, he returned to his tent from a plastic foraging expedition and looked for Jana. He found her playing with a group of teenagers, normal people. He stood back to grasp what was unfolding with a half grin. Jana has made new friends. They took turns patting the dog, and she enjoyed it animatedly. Maina stood on the fringes and watched as it lasted. When the group continued on their way to the football pitch, Jana tagged along, and they seemed not to mind. At the pitch, the boys commenced their warm-up routine. They stretched and jogged around the pitch while Jana sat, tongue out, and seemingly watched proceedings, eager for more attention. After the warm-up routine, they gathered at the center of the pitch to discuss and choose what kind of game or challenge they would indulge in that day. Just about that time, they were joined by a middle-aged white male. He engaged the lads for a couple of minutes and produced a whistle, which he blew 3 times to indicate that talk time was over. And with that, the lads scattered off in different positions on the pitch, ready for kickoff. He was the convener of the group and was assisted by 2 managers. They set about officiating the game. All this enchanted Maina. As if in a trance, he drifted out of the shadows towards the action. Jana greeted him excitedly as he approached the sidelines. One of the assistants casually asked him if he could play. One of the boys had not shown up for training, and the 7-a-side match would not proceed because the group was 13 instead of 14. Maina nodded to confirm his willingness to make up and play for the absent boy. He dumped his stinking and dirt-impregnated jacket and cap on the sidelines and was handed a yellow jersey belonging to the side he would represent. He was relegated to a full left-back position. The manager's assistant took a central position on the pitch and signaled the game open. The lads played well. They could execute reasonable ball control and maintain communication amongst each other, and they had an above-average rating on teamwork. The manager would occasionally pause play to tutor on aspects of tactics and technique. Maina did his best to fit in. He was resorting to outright clearance in the first 20 minutes, but later, he forged communication with his back line and encouraged a link with the center through clean passes and runs. His controls were good, and they showed no sign of fatigue as the game came to a close. The group gathered around the manager for a recap and review of the game. Football is a team game, he started. I want to see the ball move very freely amongst you. Don't hold onto the ball if you don't have to, he continued. As the ball moves towards you, you must have 2 or more options of what to do with it as you trap it. Remember that the ball becomes truly yours when you can only trap it, he roared. He continued for the next 5 minutes, and the lads in turn asked questions on aspects still alien to them. As they got ready to disperse, one of the assistants approached Maina. He asked his name, where he lived, and his age. He informed him of the next training itinerary and encouraged him to show up. Maina handed back the jersey he was given, slid back into his old jacket, and slipped into the shadows once more, with Jana trotting right behind him. The manager's voice lingered as he lay in his tent that night. He wondered if he had to reorient himself with the normal people. Was it possible for people to accept him, being smiled at, spoken to, and encouraged while at a task? Too many questions, but he was excited too. Grateful. Maina learned the outfit's name at the next training session, the Eastland's Shooting Stars. Conrad Branson convened it. Conrad was born in Kenya. His parents were successful in post-independence Kenya. They started leasing hectares of arable land in Kericho and Eldoret, where they farmed tea and coffee on a mechanized scale. They established an export route that gave them access to markets in America, the United Kingdom, and Asia. When the money came in, they bought large expanses of land in Eldoret and along the coastlines of Diani in Kwale County. The couple expanded their frontier and doubled their fortunes by sheer hard work. By the time Conrad was born, they were worth quite a fortune. He attended early and lower schools in Kenya, and the spirit of the time helped mold him into a resilient and still-minded Kenyan American. After attending high school at the prestigious St. Gregory School in Eldoret, he proceeded to Georgetown University in the United States of America, where he bagged a degree in public administration. People close to him recount that he was full of dreams, of things he needed to do and accomplish, and grounds he would want to break in Kenya. Therefore, he was on a flight back to Kenya 1 week after graduation. He never saw himself as an American. Africa was his birthplace and homeland. A son who spoke fluent Kiswahili and Kikalenjin. He plowed himself right into the African soil from whence his parents had reaped handsome. He married a fellow American and classmate, Kate Presley, and they had 4 children. He grew in influence and helped double the fortunes of his family. His love for Africa was evident in his acceptance of Africa and Africans, and Africa opened herself to him. Conrad plunged into numerous humanitarian causes when his last child left home. He focused on turning many of his passions into projects that benefit humanity and impact society and history. One such passion was football. He had a burning desire to handpick, groom, manage, nurture the best football team out of Kenya and East Africa. He may take them to the African or World Cup one day. With the help of his 2 assistants, Conrad had begun picking boys with a mix of talent and passion, ones who were willing to learn. They traversed the Eastlands, picking under 17 boys and building a team. He didn't know what to make of him when he met Maina after a couple of training sessions, but he read from his eyes. He had seen his type before. There were always shadowy figures, nomadic castaways, either too high on glue or too weak with hunger to care about sports or personal development. Their lives were simply about how to score the next high or get the next meal. Conrad had watched him play on that particular day with added interest. He had his assistant bring him before him, and he secretly wished he would not melt away into the shadows, that he would continue to show up. He instructed the assistant to hand him a 1,000 shillings note with a promise of 500 shillings each time he showed up for practice. For the boy, that was too good to be true. Playing with the team had become his essence, a pure escape, and now he was getting paid for it. The boy kept his side of the bargain and traversed pitches and playgrounds with the shooting stars. Training took them to Umoja, Kayole, Kariobangi, Buruburu, Utawala, South B, Jericho, and Islay. Maina went from earning 1,000 shillings from training twice a week to scratching a few hundred from plastic scavenging. He could afford 3 meals daily and matatu to and from his training sessions. But he seldom used matatus. It was almost guaranteed that the normal people, the passengers, would protest his presence. People would spit out of the window and curse him. The more subtle ones would stare or steal glances at him with disdain. Even if he chose to ignore all this, the makanga would demand double the stipulated fare from him, almost as if to remind him that his existence was a crime. To make it on time for his football sessions, Maina will log on the fringes of the road in wait for trucks seemingly headed in his direction. He would usually wait at a junction on spots with bumps or potholes. The idea was that the trucks would slow down to navigate the rough patch. This will allow him to cling onto them. Sometimes he was lucky, one single hitch would deliver him to his destination. Other times he would need several rides to get to the venue. Despite all this, his performance on the pitch was never wanting. Apart from struggling a bit with English, the language of instruction, he was largely dependable as an individual and team player, earning himself the moniker, the Buck. By the end of the year, the number of boys in the group was 32. Conrad moved a step forward towards keeping them together as they learned. He built a 3-story, 50-room hostel for the boys and other young athletes he nurtured. Each unit measured 4 meters in length and 4 meters in breadth, self-contained with built-in toilet and bath. The hostel itself sat on a 4-acre piece of land on the outskirts of Rai, with a training arena half the size of a standard football pitch. Maina was the only homeless boy in the group, so Conrad was delighted to put a roof over his head. As soon as the structure was fit for habitation, Conrad instructed that Maina be settled in long before the proposed opening and launch. And although the hostel employed 12 caretakers and assistants, Conrad personally supervised Maina's settlement and moving in. Through one of his assistants, the boy also made a plea to be allowed in with his dog, his best friend. He was denied. When Conrad got wind of that, he instructed that the security men operating the gate adopt the dog. That way, Maina and his dog could still have each other in their new home. On his first night at the hostel, he lay awake all through the night, still a bit confused by the turn of events. For the first time, for a very long time, he had a sense of security and belonging. He was guaranteed 3 meals a day. He could now shower as many times a day as he wished. Everyone directly addressed him by his name, giving him a great sense of identity. One night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his whole life playing out like an uncensored movie, Conrad's deep voice echoing in his subconscious. From here, what the rest of your life becomes is entirely your making, he admonished. Keep your eyes on the future and make friends here. Take your training sessions serious and live one day at a time, he concluded. He lay there and made a silent promise to himself that he would not disappoint Conrad. As he slept off in the wee hours, he dreamt of one boy. She was happy and merry. She clutched a child to her bosom. Maina wasn't sure if that was him or another. She appeared intoxicated. He moved closer and melted down in a fit of emotions, but Wamboi showed none, completely unable to meet his yearning for some emotional connection. It seemed all hazy, and she would occasionally flip into invisibility, But the boy felt her presence and yearned some more of it. When she appeared again, she looked apologetic, but that fizzled away quickly. Her voice reverberated through the medium, and the boy braced for contact, but it was all missed. He was sweaty and panicky, confused. The hostel's morning rising bell rescued him. He sat up and shook his head profusely, as if to shake it all off. He had a life now. The future seemed brighter now. The hostel's rising bell went off at 5 o'clock. All the boys were expected to get out of bed and freshen up. A chaplain led in a short morning devotion at 6 o'clock. Instead of having all the boys converge, the chaplain dished out the devotion with a megaphone while perched on a pavement that would later host the statue of a well-celebrated football star. That way, everyone in the compound will participate in the devotion from their own very spaces. The training assistants will blow their whistles from around 15 minutes to 7. Everyone was expected to file out and converge in the middle of the pitch, kitted for training. A fast roll call and training commenced with warm-up and brisk routines. At 7:30, the boys split themselves into 7 groups and played against each other in a game that would see a team ejected after conceding a goal. They were then replaced with the next 7 and they would continue with the scoring team. But if a team continued scoring and stayed for 3 straight games, the instructor would retire them and put on the next team. At noon, the games were called off and everyone would gather around the instructor for technical analysis and lectures. Laziness is a sin in this game, he would begin. Once you are on, you should be agile as a monkey. Trap the ball and make it yours. But it's not yours. It belongs to all your teammates. Therefore, you should be aware of your mate's position at every given point. And as a teammate, position is critical. You support the rest by positioning yourself well and being visible and eligible for passes. Do you understand? He queried. Yes, sir, the boys would echo in unison. The instructors would then take turns to touch up on skills and tactics. They would try to foster confidence, especially on the ball. Sometimes, the whiteboard would be brought out, and they would use deliberate markers to plot attack and defense strategies. The boys would be handed refreshments as they returned for a shower and lunch. Lunch was served from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock, and they were allowed to pursue other leisure for the next half hour when the bell bellowed, signaling 2 hours of siesta and rest. The bell rattles off at 4, and it is time to get up for the evening session. At precisely 5 o'clock, the boys square off in an 11-a-side game. As usual, any conceding team was expected to quit for the day, but the instructor could rest a team once it goes for more than 3 straight games. After 90 minutes, the lectures and instructions would follow once again. Once that was done, the boys would stroll into their units to wash up and get ready for supper at 8. Afterwards, they would watch football games or movies in the movie room or sit around in clusters catching up and being boys. At 10:30, it's up in your unit time. Lights out was at 11 o'clock. Maina usually would wake up at 4 a.m. That was about the time he used to wake up, a big sack dangling from his shoulders, and set out scavenging for plastics. Therefore, it's like he had a clock on his head. He couldn't sleep beyond that hour. Here, he would make his way to the penthouse balcony. He would stand there and watch the town come alive. Maina is a child hardened by pain. It's like he turned a corner and now doing all he could to forget all the pain. He would watch the sky lose its dimness as sprinkles of light started trickling in. The almost flawless morning breeze was flowing with a mild gust, caressing his nasal passages as if to flush off the stench of the dump, which was so strong he still belched it up. He would watch the tiny birds flock, singing xylophonic tones and perching on the pavements and balconies, picking off grains left by humans. He would marvel at the kaleidoscope of colors of the roofs in small but organized clusters, washed clean by rain. He would stay on and observe the chaplain too, churning out spiritual admonitions and heavenly promises as the cocks crawled away. And with time, the priceless yellow stain perpetuated on the sky by the sun, which he spiritually correlated to the light in his life right now. He would stay on to observe men and women passing by in a haste to catch the matatus, already trumpeting away and waiting to ferry them to their jobs and businesses in the central business district. He would leave just in time to brush his teeth and then head straight down to greet Jana at the security post. Jana was usually leashed and housed in a 3-square-meter doghouse at the gate. She would greet Maina with whimpers and whines, tail wagging widely as if to say, "Hey, why did you leave me here alone?" Maina would crouch over and rub her back vigorously, talking to her, assuring her she was better off now. With that, she would let out intermittent loud barks, as if to say, "It's alright, buddy, I get it." Maina was always the first on the pitch. Most times, the instructors would find him there, struggling with his kids, because he was more comfortable playing barefooted. But with instructions, he got better. During the sessions, the buck always was a spectacle. Any side he was on counted on his leadership and strength. He never forgets instructions. He was one of the few lads who asked plenty of questions to better themselves. His endurance was second to none. When other boys or teammates were one off, he was ever ready to push and fire on. This naturally established him as the man to pass instructions about tactics and team cohesion during an ongoing game. Indeed, instructors and mates understood all that and why he was so fired up. He was different, and he considered this the fight of his life. Within a year at the hostel, Maina stood out as a well-organized, exemplary figure on and off the pitch. By the end of that week, during Conrad's weekly visit to the hostel, Maina was summoned with 2 other boys. The 3 stood with their hats in their mouths outside his office as he rounded off a meeting with one of his attorneys. They were pensive, wondering why they had been singled out. When the attorney left, he bellowed, "Boys, come in." They all went into the beautiful office. It was a small office for a man of his status and stature. This office was just for the hostel and academy. Just big enough to house an office table, a file cabinet, a mini water dispenser, and a coffee maker. Pictures of himself and some of the staff and boys of the hostel and academy lined a section of the office. A desktop printer and photocopy machine sat on the document cabinet. His table was fairly expensive, with tabletop padding, a desktop computer, paper rack, and stationeries holder, all neatly arranged on the table. Closer to the visitor's end of the table were statues and models of some of the interests dear to his heart. A small wooden sculpture of a hippopotamus signaled wildlife and its conservation. A plastic model of a high-rise building illustrated real estate. A plastic model of a tractor stood for agriculture and farm mechanization. Paper match representations of a striker in a striking pose and a long-distance runner signified sports management. There were only 2 seats on the visitor's end of the table, so the boys stood. "Boys, how are you?" he started. "Fine, sir," echoed the boys. "I hope you are enjoying the hostel." "Yes, we are, sir," one of the boys responded as the rest nodded in affirmation. "Very well then," he said as he sat up and reached further on the table. "As you all know, we aim to have you in an environment where your best can manifest and be harvested," he began. "My goal and dream are to have the best from here play at the highest level possible. I'm in contact with some of my friends from Germany, from football talent scouts to youth team club owners and managers. Right now, we have an agreement with Dagrestin. a youth academy and junior league serial champion. What we have with them is referred to as a talent source and development agreement. This means that because you have distinguished yourselves here, we will nominate you for trials and induction at Detested. And if you prove yourselves, you will join the team's academy. From there, it's all hard work, and you stand a good chance of making it to the senior team and playing in the Bundesliga. Do you understand? The boys nodded profusely, but to a more significant extent, they did not understand. He continued, 3 of you will be placed under a special training regime for 2 months. This will entail everything you already know, plus a gym and dieting program. You will be required to exhibit the usual zeal and commitment towards the training, as it will form part of the basis for your admission into the program at Detested. In 3 months, you will all travel to Frankfurt, Germany. We will need consent of your parents or guardians. I will stand in for Maina. I have put Mr. Muchiri in charge of your special training regime for the next 2 months. If you have more questions, you can always ask, he concluded. For some seconds, it was just silence as the boys stared at Conrad. They were not sure they had a complete comprehension of his speech. Conrad in turn scanned the boys for signs of excitement or reaction to their life-changing news. After half a minute of studying them and not knowing what to make of their lackluster response, he decided to let in Mr. Muchiri to officially hand the boys to him. Mr. Muchiri, he called out. Clint Muchiri entered. Very well then, you can take over now, he breathed as he reclined back on his chair as if to suggest that his job was done. The boys only showed excitement when Mr. Muchiri took them through the whole news again, and for the next 2 months, they were subjected to a rigorous training routine. Word went throughout the hostel and beyond. The boys were extolled, exemplified, and congratulated by staff and mates. And soon, the word was going around that 2 Germans had arrived to watch the boys play and finalize the deal. They watched them play for 1 week to reaffirm if they indeed were league materials, and subsequently prepared reports to be documented by the Eastland's shooting stars and Detested. On Mina's report was a lengthy and glowing attribute to his personality on the pitch, a son of one boy who existed in the shadows. The Detested now had a character worthy of note by a world-class youth program.